Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Perceptive podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I am Josh Placer, and we have a very interesting chat lined up tonight. My guest works at a firm based out of South Korea, GXC, and we're going to be discussing the indie game market or the scene out of South Korea and how things have been changing over recent years and kind of like where things are going in terms of investing or supporting developers in that space. So please welcome to the podcast, Rick. How are you doing?
Hello, everybody. I'm doing very good. Thank you for asking.
We are both dealing with some very interesting time zones right now. It is about 2 in the morning my time as I'm recording this, and what time is it for you?
It's 3 p.m. in the
Nice.
afternoon.
Usually that's the time I do recordings during my afternoon, but it's always the fun of international calls. But
Mhm.
it is great to have you on tonight. So, as I said in our little stinger, we're going to be discussing kind of how the game industry, and especially the indie game market, has changed and grown in South Korea, as well as what you and your company do or how you're helping. So, as I'm sure for the people watching us right now recorded who probably don't know who you are, could you talk a little bit about like who you are and what your company does or specializes?
Sure. So my name is Rick Nahm, and uh, South Korean. I am Korean, nationality wise. But our business is more in a global state, to be honest. We do work with South Korean, like gaming companies and indie devs as well, of course. But the majority of our partners, clients, would come from the global ecosystem. So all the so-called like big names out there that you guys that everybody might know of, we pretty much work with all of them. So the Tencents of the world, the Embracers of the world, you name it. I mean, they pretty much work with us.
Hmm.
Um, so what we do in general is we do several businesses. We have several business pillars at GXC. And just to be, very very clear here. So GXC is a company that owns several businesses. Why we named it GXC was because we thought that we could do, a lot of things in the gaming ecosystem. So that's, in short, GXC stands for Games Multiple Companies. So G like Games X companies, right? And so we just wanted to see what we can do in good for the ecosystem and the industry, and that's how we came up with the name. Now we have three business pillars, so to say, in the works right now, and so the first one would be Global Top Round, GTR. A lot of people might have heard of this name, a lot of indies. And so what we do is we're the we want to say that we are a top tier games only accelerator out there. So I mean, a lot of people must have heard of Y Combinator in the States. So that's what we are pursuing to be, right? So we're pursuing to become the Y Combinators in gaming. So that's what we've been doing over the past 8 years, and we've done over around 70 investments around the world over the past 8 years. And right now we're just getting, every single year we're getting a lot of applicants to become part of the program. And of the so-called 70 investments that we have made, a lot of them have made it out there. And so we can talk about those later on in the show, but that's the first one. The second one would be a very interesting platform that we came up with called Game Round. Short, we call it G Round. What this is it's a beta testing platform for games that have not launched in the market yet. So what that means is, because I mean you see this in every other like entertainment pillar, right? Be it webtoons, be it TV series, be it everything, right? Even novels, I'd say. And what this does for like the content industry is it proves your possibility of success. It gives, let's say, investors or other partners, right, the comfort to kind of lend out a hand and help you guys, right? As for indies. Now, why this is because it's gaming, and gaming is entertainment. And in entertainment, nobody really plays so-called God, right? Um, and so what we've done with this platform is we've set a good enough of a tool set, to give indie devs, and it's not just indie devs out there. It's even the larger gaming companies, a way to kind of measure the possibility of success. How? If you have, like, it's one thing to tell anybody, right? A gaming company or an investor, that you have an awesome product out there, an awesome game, right? But then again, if you can get like 200, 300, 500 backers and supporters and gamers around the world playing your game and giving you awesome feedback, now that's a different thing, right? And if you get like feedback from 1,000, 2,000 people, that's a game changer, right? What we mean by that is you can get investors to actually invest into your company, right? So that's why we've kind of built this second business called G Round. As a third, we now have set up our own VC, and it's called Round Ventures. So Round Ventures, what we are out to do is we are out to kind of support, right, the later stages. Still early, but still early. Still early, but a bit later in stage. So these companies would go, just to give an example, from a GTR program kind of standpoint, right? We know that awesome companies, awesome studios are going, they're being built up, right? What after that? And so we wanted to see if we can support these guys further on. But it's not just these guys, right? We're looking at everybody. We're reviewing all deals coming from everywhere. But also what we think we have an advantage with would be, hey, now we have, right? I mean, it's not ours, right? It's a tool that we will be using, but we have G Round, right? And what we want to do with G Round at Round Ventures is we want to see if we can kind of vet the products, right, before we actually invest into them. So that's kind of our whole story.
All right, for those of you watching this recorded, we're having some connectivity issues, I guess, with our call because it's definitely a long distance discussion. So Rick has turned off his camera, so we'll keep things like this for right now. And for those of you listening to me, my voice may be a little bit distorted just because Google Hangout kind of like takes control of my microphone. So hopefully things will be fixed at least for the editing side, but just giving everyone the heads up. So, with that said, Rick, if you wouldn't mind, I guess just saying your answer again regarding what does JXC do in terms of like facilitating like the play testing, or what is that process?
Okay. So we do have a green light process, right, and a team that is on that, of course. Obviously, we want to see if we can kind of remove the entire like human factor, right? Because again, it comes back to gaming being like entertainment, right? But honestly, we don't think there's a way, at least at this moment. And so we do get applicants from all over the place, right? I think we do have like a bounty program where anybody can refer like a game, right, to the team. And they would just put it in the pipeline, and they would just test out the games, and dependent on the reviews, the team would decide if the game would get put on the platform or not. Also, we get applicants from our partners as well, because we do work with a lot of it's not just publishers out there. We do work with large publishers, mid-sized to smaller size publishers, of course, but we also work with like incubators around the world, from Spain, from Italy, from everywhere around the world. So we do work with those guys, and so we do have a good enough pipeline to kind of keep our team busy, sort of say. But at the same time, of course, we do have people on the ground, going to game shows and looking at interesting games and products, of course. And so through them, we would get interesting products in the pipeline as well.
All right. So I guess to build off of that, my next question for you With regards to, as you said, like your company and like going to shows and just like looking at indie games and just any games in particular, one of the things I want to ask you about then, because obviously, like from my point of view, I'm someone who talks about game design. I can look at video games and look at them from a design standpoint, not so much from a financial or kind of like how I guess investor friendly it is. So the question I want to ask you is like when you're looking at games, or you and like the people you that work for you look at video games, what are you like exactly like looking for? You don't have to give us any trade secrets, but like what catches like your eye in terms of how a game looks, behaves, or something that you can then say, maybe we should look more into this game.
Mm-hmm. Um, so I do want to give you like a very, very interesting and type of an answer. But to be honest, there's nothing really interesting about it. It's we look at everything, to be honest. I- in terms of platforms, we look at mobile, PC, console, even VR and AR. We do look at them. uh, People might say that VR, AR, it's just too early, but we know that it is going to come at some point, right? And so we do not want to miss out on that opportunity. So we do look at VR, AR as well. Um, Now, in terms of like genre, we would look at almost everything, right? Obviously, we wouldn't look at adult entertainment, gambling, and so on and so forth. But the rest, we will look at everything: RTS, FPS, casual games, match three, even, and so on and so forth. We will look at every single thing. Now, in terms of like design, how the looks and feel, that answer is the same thing. We look at everything. I think one thing that we've learned over the course of the several years that we've been in business, we have learned that, hey, just because the game that is put in front of me is the type of the game that I would not play, right? The look and feel is not the texture. It's not me. Let's say, right? It shouldn't be a pass. Just because I dislike a game, just because I love a game, doesn't mean that the game will fail or succeed. So that is something that we've been able to learn over the course of 8 years. Um, so I don't want to name any names, but there were a few that really took a hit, and in a good way, right? They saw that the game hit. But then again, I look at the game and I'm like, okay, I would never play that game, right? So there are those type of games out there, and I've seen it for myself. And so for us, we do have a philosophy to say, don't think of course we are experts in the industry, of course, but just because I dislike a game or a product doesn't mean anything, to be honest.
So I guess with that said, one thing that I want to ask you about, as you just said a minute ago, that you look at everything when it comes to picking games that you want to put in front of investors or games you want to support. But for my audience, a lot of them are indie developers who understand that it is very difficult sometimes just to get your game in front of a consumer or in front of a playtester, let alone, a publisher or investor. And for that audience who may be watching us right now, do you have any like tips or words of wisdom, like anything that you've seen that maybe they can improve on, or something for them to pay attention to when they're showing their games to people?
Sure, that's a good question. So I would say know your audience. I would say just remember who you're talking to, right? Because your pitch has to be different, right? If in comparison, uh, you talking to a publisher versus you talking to an investor. I think that has to be like the message, the tone and manner has to be different. What you're selling is pretty much different, right? Because if you are talking to, let's say, a publisher, I don't want to even take like the largest name out there. Let's say a mid-sized publisher. Now, what are you doing there, right? You are trying to sell your game, right? You're trying to get a publishing agreement, which means a licensing deal, right? So you want them to invest, so-called. Of course, they're going to recoup it most of the times, but you do want to give, you want for them to give you, a so-called minimum guarantee or a licensing fee. Now, for that, you would have to, of course, do your research, right? Make sure that you know what that publisher is looking for, right? Because if you are, reaching out to, let's say, a publisher that is mostly looking for FPS games, right? And you have like a so-called very soft, like, casual game. No matter how you sell it, it's not going to sell, right? So, and it just makes you look, not smart, right? Not doing your research. I think that is something that a lot of indies, a lot of developers don't do. And so that is number one. To that extension, I think talking to investors has to be different, right? Investors are, of course, to get them to, bite on, on yourselves, on the team and the company. Of course, the product has to be, that's going to be in the forefront, of course, right? That's the first thing that you're gonna show them to get their interest, like gauge their interest. So of course that is important, but also at the same time, they're going to drill down on the team and the company, right? So that is for investors, at least, not publishers. For investors, it's more of the team, right, and the founders and the developers rather than the product itself. Now, for investors that are smart, I would say they will look at the team rather than the game. Why? Because again, hey, it comes down to the same point again. They can't play God. Nobody really knows. And so if they feel that they are looking at a game that, personal likes, dislikes aside, a viable product, right? Not too buggy, blah, blah, blah. I think investors will look at the deal, review the deal itself. But then again, they will come down to, hey, what's your background? What have you been doing? And your team itself, your supporting team, who's your lead designer, and all that. One point to add to that would be, so this is why a lot of investors look at your track record, right? Where are you from? Have you worked at Blizzard? Or were you on the the core team of the Diablo IP? And so in the news, you see a lot of these kind of deals happen, right? A veteran team of 4, 5, 6, 8 people out of nowhere. They have not nowhere, but like prestigious brands. They all come from. They have like good years under the belt, a lot of experience. And they've come together to make this innovative kind of a game, right? And sometimes you even see in the news that sometimes they don't even have a prototype, right? But then they get an injection of a few $1 million, right, to kick off their business. Again, you can tell that investors are it's not 100% about the game, right? It's about the people. And when they see these kind of teams come to them, they're like, okay, at least credibility is there, right? But for me, I would ask, okay, so how many people were on the Diablo team, right? You're one of 100 or something like that, right? So that's kind of, it's kind of awkward in a sense. But again, that's one of the reasons, because investing into games, again, games is entertainment nobody really knows, and that's why investors have to lean on something like that. That's how we feel. But at the same time, I think it does give I don't really think it's fair to some point, because we have seen developers that are making their first game, right? They haven't worked at EA, they haven't worked at Ubisoft, and they are fresh out, maybe sometimes even from college, and they're getting together and they think they have an awesome idea. 3, 4 kids, 3, 4 students, whatever you call them, very young, very fresh, and again, they're looking for investments. Now, in those cases, yes, it is more difficult to find funding, to find investors to keep hop on board, but I wouldn't say it's impossible. I've seen several cases where we've seen teams talking to investors and them getting dinged just because of that, right? Hey, and they have like a full-fledged playable build. It's not even a prototype. The playable build is like you can play the game for like 30 minutes, an hour, right, which is legit. But then it's just because, hey, it's your first game, guys, and they get dinged. And we feel that that's kind of unfair. Yeah, we do understand, but like sometimes we're like, okay, that's not fair. And so within the 70-ish investments that we've made from the accelerator, we have seen us making investments into some of these, several cases from that standpoint. So yeah, those are the few things I think that is critical. Of course, there are many more. One thing that we have noticed was developers talking to investors and publishers, them getting a deal. They don't even read the contracts, to be honest. And that's, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of things that these so-called like super talented developers need in terms of help. And because we saw that, that's why we came up with an accelerator kind of an idea.
All right. And what you just said there, I think, is very interesting, because as you were talking about how the investor looks at a video game, and specifically about the team behind them, it is kind of like the opposite for like someone like me. Again, like as we were just on before the stream, over the past 10 years now, or now actually going 11 years, I have interviewed and I have played hundreds at this point, even thousands of games from independent creators. And like you just said, some of them may have like literally no game dev experience, or at least no major game dev experience. And for that audience, like I have played some fantastic games that I know that no like investor or publisher would probably ever touch with a 10-foot pole, just because of either how it looks, or if it's just like this unusual genre or design that would never fit. And as you just said, like there are games out there that surprise us. I'm sure the market is still like scratching its head over the success of something like Vampire Survivors from last year. And it is, I think, as we were saying earlier, like when it comes to like the developer and publisher side, like for a lot of developers, it can be very depressing to have like a very interesting, unique idea. But again, if your resume doesn't have a high enough credentials, that people don't trust you, and I'm not quite sure there is a perfect solution or a great way to get around that. Or again, like sometimes it just be like 5 friends right out of college, making their first prototype.
True. Now, I don't know if anybody has done any statistics around this, to be honest, right? Maybe they have, maybe they haven't, because there are a lot of research companies out there. But I don't really think, I'm not just going to say it. I was just thinking, right, to what you just said. I was just thinking, okay, in comparison, if we compare, right, the success rate of, let's say, fresh out of college kids, right? So not particularly like fresh out of college, but for teams that they're working on their first game, let's say, right? versus a team that has veterans on the team, and they have worked on like several like successful like IPs and franchises. Them working on their collectively first game together as a team. Success rate, right? Which would be higher? I've never thought about that, to be honest, but I'm just thinking, straight off the bat, top of my head, I would think there wouldn't be that much of a difference. That's how I see it, to be honest. Hey, I might be wrong, but like that's how I think. But to your point, to your question, so-called question, how do you manage that? How do you deal with that? I think it is still very tough, right? It is. I think it is still very tough to be a first-time team making a first-time game, to make a very decent, viable. It works. It's not too buggy. But then again, it's your first game, right? To get a deal, status quo-wise, I think is still going to be very tough. I think there has to be more and more investors or accelerators, be them accelerators, be them like VCs. I do think there has to be more and more of them coming out of the market. This is and this is kind of one of the reasons why we came up with G Round, right? The platform, because again, sometimes, hey, you won't be even able to, you might even not have the chance to pitch your game, right? Because you're a first-time team. But then again, you have, you come upon like a platform such as G Round, and it's a way for yourself to, it's a way for you to prove yourself, right, to the rest of the world and the investors. Now, I think then you might have a slightly better chance. And so we're just hoping that the platform can play a role in this industry.
Yep, and being able to have more of these avenues for indie developers, something that I am definitely very much a proponent of. And it's why I tend to focus on smaller teams and indie games, a lot of the coverage and a lot of the discussions I have, because I know very plainly that if I'm talking about this game, most likely it's not getting covered anywhere else, or at least not getting covered by a major name. Like, as I'm sure you're well aware of, there are a lot of video games being released week by week now. And even someone like me can't possibly cover them all. And it is kind of like that challenge. Because as you said, like, just getting like your foot in the door to a lot of people in of itself is an ordeal, let alone trying to get a contract with a major publisher. And I guess to give a question to that, as you've been talking about the accelerator, I guess for developers like listening, like, I guess like, how do they like get in, or like what is the process of applying for that?
You just have to look at, either follow the accelerator GTR, or just, keep your eye out. Because for one thing, I know that the accelerator, for me, I'm not, too much hands-on nowadays, because I've moved on to become like Round Ventures. So we're looking, for studios, and for studios that are at a larger size. But speaking of GTR itself, I think they're always looking for talented teams, and for developers to reach out. I would even say, because I know that the team just reads every single email sent their way. So I would say send them an email, or talk to people. A lot of people know GTR, and so for everybody, right? Not just GTR, but even for Round Ventures, we will look at a prospect, right, or a deal that is given to us, like sent us our way, from our friends and family, right, partners. So referrals definitely goes. You have a better shot, of course, right? Because if if we see, let's say, Focus Entertainment, right? For instance, I'm just going to take for example, Focus Entertainment is a very close partner of ours. 505 Games is a very close partner of ours. NetEase is a very close partner of ours. And so if we see, let's say, Curve Digital, by the way, is also. Anyways, so a lot of these like so-called game companies, they do send us referrals, right? Why? Because it's not just there yet for them to pick up, right? And they trust Globe Top Round to be able to say, okay, they all believe that if there is someone out there that can pick these guys up, right, from ground under, and help these guys grow, right? It's not like GTR as an accelerator is going to give you like hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not that. It's not about the money now. It's about the GTR program and the GTR team, right, being by their side, because all these gaming companies know, they've seen it happen. They've seen the GTR program and the team take a two-man team, right, a two-man studio, and build it up to like a 40-man, 50-man team and a studio. They've seen it happen. And so whenever they come upon a very talented team and a very interesting game, what they do is they send them their way. And so that is, and it could be in many forms, right? You can email is one way, good way. Being at events, because I do know that the team is running around events very soon. I think they're going to be at the Taipei Game Show. But yeah, regardless, GDC, I think the team is sending like 5-6 people. Gamescom always there. BIG Brazil. So Nordic, everywhere. They're everywhere. And so you can have a booth. You might not have a booth. That's fine. But just be there and try to present yourself, because I know that. At least I know that GTR, the accelerator, the team itself, they share that thought of, hey, nobody really plays God. And so even if the game is to their dislikings in terms of like, tone and manner and, design, look and feel, they will still look at it. And how will they evaluate it? If they think it's interesting, they will put it on the platform, and they will get 500 to 1,000 people to tell them if the game has, that opportunity of success.
Mm-hmm. Going back to what you just said a minute ago about kind of like not looking directly at the money when it comes to, indie games and what games they can produce. This actually brings up a question that I want to ask you about. As you said, like the start, like you are not a game designer by trade. Like you're looking at things from like an investment point of view, business point of view. For a lot of indie games that I've played, the ones that have succeeded, they're like success, or I should use air quotes there. Success is one of those things that we hear very different things from developers, from publishers, from investors. Like there are some companies that if a game can't sell at least 200 to 500,000 copies, who cares? Don't even bother looking at it, move on to the next. There are some developers out there who I've seen that if they could sell 50,000 copies, that would be life-changing for them. Because there's some studios I'm sure you've worked with or you've seen where if a game can't sell at least several million copies, it's, a abject failure. And what I want to ask you about is, like, with, like, investors or with the people that you've been working with, what do they see as a success? Like, if you put, like, a small team, like, let's say it is, like, a 5-person student team, and they say, you know what, we think this game could sell 100,000 copies. Very low investment, but it's not going to, light the world on fire in terms of bringing that money in. Would there be people interested in that versus like another team saying, you know what, we bet we could sell 800,000 copies, 1 million copies, but a far larger investment? Like, how do the people that you like deal with and like from that like kind of universe or that world, how do they look at like the success of a game or the return on investment? Like,
Yeah. So I just want to make one thing clear.
mm-hmm.
So I myself am not a game designer nor a developer. But it doesn't mean that, that's just me, right? The rest of the team, we have producers, ex-producers, we have game designers, ex-game designers on the team as well. And so we even have like a professional, a pro gamer, ex-pro gamer, kind of a guy on the team as well. I think we have 2 or 3 people that have done that in the past. Now, so that's just to say that, GTR itself, Round Ventures, we all have, our own expertise. It's just me that I'm from the business side. But to answer your question, it is kind of complex. And the way that I see it over the past, 8 years that I've been doing this, it just feels that, again, publishers and investors are different, right? Publishers are mostly, they look at the game, right? They look at that game's probability of success. That's how I would put it. And for, again, there are several, let's say, several sizes of developers, publishers, right? So there are the large publishers, and then there are the mid, and then the smaller size publishers, so-called indie publishers, right? I think because you won't see a large publishing label, right, give you a deal because they think, or you tell them that you think you can sell, let's say, 500,000 copies, let's say 300,000 copies, right? I don't think the large labels will touch that deal. Now, for mid-sized to indie-sized, pretty much, I guess they, probability of them touching that deal would be higher, of course,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the difference right there. As for investors, I would think, again, investors would lean towards more the team, the people, right? Because, hey, if you look at, even Supercell, right? Their first hit was like what, game 3, 4? Rovio, right? Their first hit game was when, like 48th or something. Yeah, right. So the idea here is that if you find a good enough team, and that's kind of where the so-called, hey, you're a veteran team and you get this money, right? That's where it comes from. But it's not, investors invest into so-called independent studios, whether they're veterans or not, because they see that this team will come out with something in the next 2-3 years, right? 4 or 5 years, for that matter. It might not be their first game, right? Their first game it can flop, it might flop, it might just do a mediocre success, just sell, like, I don't know, a small amount of copies, right? But then they will go through that learning and do their second game, if they're lucky to get further investments, of course. They do their second game, and so, okay, so what's the probability of success then? What about their third? What about their fourth and fifth, right? And so I think that kind of approach is different from, like, if you're comparing it with like how publishers see it. Publishers are more looking at, it's less about the team. Of course, it's the team, of course. Because the team has to be able to, like, ship the product, finish up and stuff like that, and execute, right? Because a prototype, a vertical slice, is just that, right? Just because you have an awesome vertical slice, a prototype, doesn't mean that you being able to, like, sustain that level of quality till the end. It doesn't mean that you have that. And so, but again, it comes down to the first product. The publishers are looking at that game, right? They're giving you a contract for that game alone. As for investors are looking at things long term, right? It's more of a marathon for them. Obviously, of course, every investor would want to see that team come up with a hit with their at least, like, third or fifth, right? That's how I see it. But no investor wants to invest into a team and kind of expect them come up with a hit game on their 10th game, right?
Hmm.
But again, it's more of a long ball kind of a game, versus publishers.
All right, yeah, and there's definitely a lot that we can certainly get into about kind of the different mindsets of investors and publishers, but I know we are kind of like on a bit of a time, and again, like it is definitely late here, so I don't know how long I'll go before I'll fall asleep. But before we talk a little bit more about kind of like the state of the game development space out of South Korea, I wanted to just ask you: is there any other aspects of GXC or anything that your business does that we haven't touched on yet that you would like to talk to the viewers about?
No, I think I've pretty much touched upon a lot of things. Obviously, we did talk a lot more on GTR the accelerator, right? Because indies are indies, right? I don't think any. I mean, it would take a bit of more time for the so-called indies to, um, try to get investments from VCs. So, and that's why we talked more about the program and the accelerator program. But no, I think it's you know, uh, I don't know if you'll be sharing, our contacts, but I just want to make sure that, anybody out there that has something very interesting that wants a shot, reach out to the GTR program guys, but also Round Ventures.
All right, and for people watching us recorded, there should be links and such in the description down below. But with that said, for kind of like the last sub questions I have for you tonight, I want to talk a little bit more about kind of what is the state of game dev in South Korea. For, as I said at the start, for my audience, when we think of like the South Korean game scene, or at least over like the last 15, 20 years, a lot of people will just instantly turn to like say esports or how StarCraft got huge back in the 90s into the 2000s. But obviously things have changed since then. And as you said, like your company has been around for about 8 years now. So with that said, my first question that I want to ask you is from where like you're sitting, what is kind of like game dev in South Korea like today?
That's a very good question, an interesting one. We would say that we are South Korean experts, but we do know what's going on. We see what's going on in the peninsula. We see, for first and foremost, Korea, Japan, right? Both countries are very interesting, right? They're very niche. Market size is huge, but how things are going about in the industry in both countries are very niche. I think it's very interesting. Um, Now, I don't want to speak too much about Japan because, again, I don't know much about Japan. But for Korea, I can tell you for one thing, over the past 20 years, it's mostly been large companies just, doing everything, right? Leading the way, right? The industry itself. And a lot of these larger companies got a lot of support from the government as well, right? And so because of that, they've been able to grow, exponentially, right? So you look at, and there are a lot of big names out there, right? You have Nexon, you have NCSoft, you have NeoWiz, Smilegate, you have Line Games even, and so on and so forth, right? There are so many games out there, even Krafton, right? Krafton's there, the PUBG guys. So now looking at those guys, they have done extremely well over the past 20 years, right? They have billion-dollar franchises here and there, right? Crossfire, one of them. They're raking in $1 billion every single year. What that means is they have funding to expose, right? And what they've been doing, I would say, which is kind of different, right, from the global like players out there. I have seen two things. Number one, because of the big companies just leading the way, right, in Korea, I think this is kind of, in Korea, the indie scene is not that big, right? In comparison to like, other countries. Why I say this is like, looking at the market size of the gaming industry in Korea, it's huge. It's like number fourth on the list, right, in the world. Now, looking at that, you would expect a lot of indies to come out, right, as well. But what's really interesting in Korea about Korea is that you don't really see a lot of indies pop out. I'm pretty sure that there are indies out there, but like the ones that surface, right, are not that many. And and a lot of people say that it's due to the big companies leading the way, right? It's just all the focus is on them, and because of that, um, because we think, because we work with a lot of governments out there, right? Canada, Spain, Finland, Sweden, Malaysia, uh, you name it, right? We work with Spain, Spain. We work with a lot of governments out there, and how we see it is that in order for the indie scene to actually make, see the day of light, light of day, sorry, it has to be somebody kind of, being in the forefront, leading the way. And most of the times it's the governments, right? It's the governments with their budgets, trying to help out the indie scene. You see the governments trying to put focus on other tech sectors, right, in the industry with their startups, right? These mobile banking, fintech, AI, e-commerce. You see a lot of those happening, right, around the world. Now, we feel that in comparison, gaming is kind of left out, right? In a lot of countries, not just South Korea, but like South Korea is I think is on the top of the list. And why is that? It's because, hey, they see the major companies just work at it, and they feel that it's doing fine, right? And because of all of that, all of those things happening in South Korea, we just feel that it's kind of disappointing to see not that many indies in the sector. And we're trying to talk with the governments, right, the legislators, the policymakers, to see if we can actually go in and help these guys, right? So that's one tremendous, like, huge phenomenon that we see in South Korea, which is very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And what you said about kind of like the niche of like games and companies out like the Korea Japanese area is another very interesting aspect, because one of the things I think that has really changed, not just in the indie space but the game dev space over the past like 13 years, has been, as you said at the very beginning, like this very more globalized approach when it comes to the industry. That it's really no longer, or at least it has been downplayed, like games that are very, I guess I would say, like regional centric. That a game that is, let's say, that would only appeal to, let's say, United States, or a game that would only appeal to Japan. And I think a lot of that has also been the growth of mobile games. There are, as I'm sure you're well aware of, a lot of huge mobile games that obviously they get their start out of like the China, Korea, Japanese market, and then they get global version. Genshin Impact is probably one of the biggest examples of this. And kind of like the idea of, I guess, like a game being only for like one region or one part of the world doesn't, I think, really apply as much anymore today as it did maybe 35 years ago.
Um, True. Um, it's like games are. So this is another thing that we say internally, right? At our company, we also say something like, "Hey, games is, apart from the fact that nobody really knows which game is going to fly or not." Um, Another thing that we say is, just because. there of course there are games that are globally loved, right? Liked, but there are going to be games, and I might even say majority, but there are going to be games out there that just fit a single region or a country, right? Um, just because a game is successful in Korea doesn't mean that it's going to be liked, across the globe. Now, this not might be the answer to your question, but because it just popped into my head right now, it's one of the another phenomenon that we see in Korea is that because Korea is a big enough market, right? And I think that's kind of where Japan is today. But because like Japan is like what number three, right? Uh, because of the market size that Korea and Japan has, I think they were so-called okay to say, okay, we'll just capture Korea first, right? And it just stood there. They just left it there, right? Sometimes, because as a Korean national, right, myself, the games that kind of I played when I was like, let's say, in my 20s, right? Um, Kind of disappointing to even say that nobody outside Korea knows about these games. But again, because it was a big enough market, they were actually okay to just say, okay, we'll just, of course they do want to go outside, they do want to go global, of course. Who doesn't? But there are several IPs that just weren't able to crack that. Um, and so that's kind of a characteristic, if you say, about the Korean like gaming market. That's a lot of games do that. Maybe they might touch China, they might touch a bit of Japan, but like the rest of the Western world, I mean, yeah, it's just a bit disappointing.
Yeah, and it really has been like very interesting to see, like as we said earlier in this discussion about what happens or like what games actually do manage to kind of like break through that bubble. And I've seen like a few myself over the last few years, like games like Dyson Sphere Program, um, the Project Moon developers, another one, developers on Gunfire Reborn, and it has definitely become a very interesting case. And as you said a few minutes ago, that for the longest time, that a lot of developers or a lot of people saw like the Korean market as just the biggest names. But I guess I'm not sure if this is something that you can speak to.
Mhm.
Have there been any like developments or anything that you've seen in terms of, I guess, more places doing like game dev courses or like game dev as a career growing in the Korean space?
Yes. There are, again, I can't speak in comparison to the rest of the world. But I do know that there are so-called in universities, right? To get like to become like an expert, not an expert, but at least go through the basic courses, right? There are several game related, like development related, like courses in universities, um, that students can pursue as a career as a game dev. There are several out there,
Hmm.
but again, I don't really know in detail. So
And that's fine. um, I guess as you were saying, in terms of like the market share in Korea being very huge, like for like the mobile industry, this is something I wanted to ask you about. Again, I'm not sure like how versed you
Mhm.
are in it, but one of the things that I've seen, like one of my recent books I wrote about game design, focus on kind of the evolution of mobile and the free to play space. And this is something that has, at least from like where I'm sitting, has certainly transformed over the past decade. Like again, like we looked at like 2010, 2013, this was the likes of Rovio, of Clash of Clans, of very casual minded games. Now we fast forward to today, or even the last like 2 to 3 years,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
have again games like Ark Knights, Punishing Gray Raven, Genshin, of course, and
Yeah.
we're seeing this kind of change or this kind of shift. I think trying to attract like I guess a quote unquote more hardcore base to
Hmm.
their games. And I just wanted to ask you again, from like where like from what you've been looking at or what you've been seeing, has that been a trend in terms of I guess like changing what does it mean to like make or have a mobile game appeal to a market today?
I mean, I think it's just a normal trend that you can expect, right? Um, handsets, uh, handsets are, it's you take them everywhere, right? So you're not disconnected, right, from online. Um, be it, I mean, sometimes you see people play games on plane, right, in flights. And so, of course, not the heavy ones. They might be just, offline games, but still they play them, right? And so, um, so it's, and people like me, right? 20 years back, growing up with like games, right? It's just normal. I think I was reading an article about like Chinese New Year's, right? Because right now it's that holidays right now. And I was reading about how things have changed, right? Um, in comparison to the previous generation. Previous generation, they would get together and play like traditional games, right? It might be a version of a, just give you an example, right? Chinese chess or something like that, right? People would play those type of games, right? Get together, you stand up all together, you throw sticks, you do this and that, right? Nowadays, what do you see? You see people playing games, right, on their mobile devices. They go to like PC cafes and such. Why that is because us growing up with mobile games and PC games when we were young, now we're the older generation, right? And so because of that, the adaptation is like, it's just normal, right? Um, and so again, same thing goes for games. I would even say same thing goes for like other sectors as well, but especially for games, it's normal to see it's we use our phones well. Even if we're in like 30s, 40s, 50s, we still use our mobile sets very well. Why? Because we grown up with them. We grew up with these devices, and because of that, like playing games on your mobile devices is pretty natural, right, to see. And because of that, I think developers, not just the big names, even the smaller names, developers, what they want to do is they want to kind of be able to capture that market, right? Um, and so what I see is I don't see a shift in mobile games trying to become more hardcore. I don't see it in that way. I see it more in a way of developers wanting to trying to make their game multi-screen, multi-platform, right? So nowadays, I mean, it's a huge keyword, right, in the industry. It's, hey, developers want to make games that their audience can play all together, whether it's on their PC or their mobile or the Nintendo Switch, right? So they want to see their gamers play on various devices, uh, you know, in a single gameplay. That's what they want to see, and so that's why I think, uh, of course, technically, it has to be viable, possible, but they're finding ways. Simpler ways to navigate. If it's if you're playing the game on your mobile device and so on and so forth. But I think that is the general. Um, what do you say? How do you say it? That's the general thing that developers are looking for. They're trying to make it like multi-screen.
Yeah, and with like what you said, like with like how people have been growing up with mobile, I think that is definitely another major factor. Like I've been when I was doing some research, I was looking up kind of like the market trends, where people are showing or where people are playing games from. And mobile today, I think, is still like the number one most platform in the world. And like for like my audience or the people who are watching this right now, I know a lot of them are predominantly console and PC gamers. They are the people who there's a lot of people there who still view mobile as, it's all Angry Birds and Farmville. And those are the only games that have
Pleasure games, yeah.
existed. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, we have seen this evolution of people really trying to elevate this genre. And as we've said, like the games that succeed, they are huge. And
Hmm.
it's very fascinating just again like how we've seen like developers like come out of like the Korean and Japanese market or even China as well in terms of having like a mobile game or even just like coming like right out of university with a project. And like we said a few minutes ago, like you never really know sometimes like the reach of these games. And when they blow up like this, it it's just like really like fascinating to see like kind of how the industry itself will respond to it.
Um, Again, it's I think there's a lot of things that factor in. Um, first thing that comes to mind would be the the evolution of technology. That's for one. Definitely, that's there. Number two is I think again there is even for the hardcore players, right? I think there is that sort of personal need, right? That thirst. Of course, there are players that just think of mobile games as just like you said, casual, very casual, light, kind of games. And so that because of that perception, they're always like, okay, I'm just gonna stay in my room, stay up till late, play like Call of Duty, blah blah, and just be a real gamer, right? But at the same time, I would think that if developers can kind of replicate right that kind of experience, if they can do that on mobile handsets, I do think that even the hardest hardcore gamers out there, they will be up for the challenge. They will try it out, and so and that's why you see developers trying to make it transform, not transform, but like take their so-called hardcore PC games and try to even if it means like simplifying the functions a bit, then trying to like make them into like the mobile screens. um yeah, you see a lot of that happen.
All right. So I think with that, we are just over an hour in, and we can probably start to wrap things up because it is a little after 3 in the morning this time. So I don't know how many more very good questions I'll have for you in the next few
Mhm.
minutes.
That's
So
fine.
I think with that said, any final points regarding like the South Korean market or just the Korean market or even just like the global sector from what you've experienced that you would like to share before we kind of go into our wrap up?
um I think we have covered a lot. um Nothing really sticks out right now. But I do think that I do want to say this. So gaming is a very, I mean, people say, right, music and TV together, right? Gaming is larger than that, and it's growing at a faster pace. Um, I do think that the opportunity is there, right? The market's growing, and we will see it even grow further. Now we do see, because we've seen like 60-year-old, 70-year-old like gamers play games on a platform, right? What that means is that if they were like really really early adapters, right, back in the day, right, Nintendo's, like uh, our generation, when we become 60, a lot of us will be playing games. What that means is the market will just grow gradually. And so because of that, I think, and who knows, right? After mobile devices, I think there are, I mean, it might be VR, AR, who knows? It might be something else. So there will be other platforms. Just because there are other platforms, I don't think that the PC world will die, right? PC will still be there. So what that means is you have an aging audience that will still play games, right? Going on further and further. You will see even more addictive games, even more fun games out of the market. You will see even more so-called screens that you will be able to play the games on. And of course, we don't want to leave out connectivity, right? So even the countries that don't have as much as connectivity at current, they will soon. And so with all of those, factoring in, I think the market is just going to grow like crazy. And with the game engines, evolving even further, and the visuals being like crazier, you will see games that you can't imagine existed today. And so with that, I just want to urge, and I think that there's enough space for everybody, to be honest, right? It doesn't have to be you as a publisher, you as an investor, to say, hey, I want to just own everything, right? I think there's enough space for everybody, and this is something that my mentor told me, right? When I told him that I was going into gaming investments, he was like, hey, welcome, open arms, right? And that's DG at David Gardner at LVP. He again, I agree. It's just there's enough space for everybody, and that's why, and that's one of the reasons why we kind of have a motto to say at Round Ventures that we want to co-invest with everybody. Not everybody, but at least the investors that have belief in us and that have given us the funding. What we want to do at Round Ventures is we don't want to go in alone. We do want to invest together with our co-investors.
And I think that is a really good point to end on for our conversation. So, with that said, Rick, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Jexy, as well as kind of sharing your thoughts and kind of your advice for developers as well. So, I'll have links down below, but anything regarding social media or anything you would like to mention, feel free right now. The mic is yours.
No, right now I can't recall anything else. It's just Global Top Round Accelerator is there for everybody to apply to. We get like around 500 applicants every single year, and so just make sure that you apply. The G-Round platform, so gameround.co is the platform that you can check out. It's for developers, not just for developers, but also for publishers, investors to check out, but also for testers, gamers that want to make a difference, that want to help out the developers, right, to make an awesome game, polish up the game. I think that's a very interesting platform for everybody to check out. And then not but least, Round Ventures. So roundvc.com, you can check it out. And if you think that you have what it takes to make a sustainable, a growing company, then please do apply. The application form is on the website.
All right, sounds good. So, with that said, for everyone watching, we're going to end things here for this episode. As always, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to like, subscribe, let us know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to check out the Discord and Patreon as well. And once again, if you are an indie developer or anyone in the industry who wants to come on and share a game you're working on or just talk about game development, I am always looking for guests. So be sure to reach out. And with that said, once again, Rick, thank you for coming on. Of course, the best with your company, and hopefully you'll have some amazing games to support and invest in the future.
Thank you, Josh.
All right. So with that said, everyone, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where is the art and science of games. And until our next show, take care.